Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on a profoundly ambitious system that's presented in our source material. It's called the law science of reincarnation. And it attempts this really astonishing feat of unifying ancient spiritual concepts, the eternal soul, with the precision of modern scientific language. It's drawing on everything from string theory and quantum physics to gravitational mechanics.
Right. And what makes this so compelling, I think, is that it proposes to elevate reincarnation from just a doctrine of passive faith, of happenstance rebirth, to something that's a verifiable, actionable science for conscious procreation and ultimately eternal life.
Exactly. So the central question we really have to grapple with today is this. Does this law science of reincarnation, with all its complex engineered mechanics, does it truly constitute a verifiable scientific framework? Or is it really a sophisticated perennial wisdom tradition that's just masked by powerful scientific metaphors?
Well, I'm going to argue that while its structural elegance it's undeniable, the framework really relies on what I'd call non-falsifiable primitives. These are concepts that are, by their very definition, outside our means of measurement. And it uses scientific terminology more like a metaphor, which, renders it a compelling philosophy but not a testable science.
And I'll be asserting that the high level of precision in the programmatic intent in its mechanics, from how gravity orchestrates soul transition to DNA re-encoding, provides the necessary technical detail and repeatability to qualify it as a legitimate science, a practice even, a system that offers humanity a way to actively control the cycle of life and death.
Okay, so let's delve into the mechanics then. How does this system scientifically anchor the soul's identity outside of the physical body?
My position really rests on the fact that this system defines the soul with a kind of mathematical rigor. It solves the most persistent problem in spiritual philosophy, which is the preservation of identity. The soul is designated as an identity invariant S. It's a topological label where its change over time is explicitly zero. Delta S over dt equals zero. This guarantees its permanence. It's a non-local constant of structure, meaning its identity is preserved no matter what world line or biological organism it inhabits. And this invariance, that's the prerequisite for eternal life. The shift to science happens because this identity, this invariant, can be purposefully tracked and recalled. The process of harmonic wave resequencing, driven by the specific frequencies of a name, allows a family to purposefully call that soul back from the cosmic field into a new DNA package. That shift, from passive rebirth to active, programmed procreation, that is engineering.
Okay. I see why you think that, and I see the appeal of that mathematical rigor. But let me offer a different perspective. The strength of this framework is its conceptual unity, yes, but that unity relies entirely on concepts that fundamentally evade physical verification. If the psi invariant is defined as existing without dynamics in spacetime, how do we establish its reality through an experiment, right? Death in this system is described as the soul's light projection onto the 4D world just shutting off. But we can't test the existence of an object that's explicitly designated as non-local, outside the limits of any energy or information flow we can actually measure.
But the source...
And furthermore, the source gives these very evocative illustrations, like the idea that a single cosmic string, the length of a guitar fretboard, could support 650 billion unique souls. Now, while that's a calculation, it's really an analogy for an incomprehensible scale. It's not a confirmed measurement. So the framework ultimately is a sophisticated knowledge system that requires an intellectual leap into the fifth dimensional realm. And that, to me, moves it outside the requirements of verifiable science.
To address your point about verification, though, we have to look at the mechanism of transition, which is designed to be programmatic, not mystical. It doesn't rely on some vague spiritual ascension. It leverages the strongest, most constant force in our solar system, gravity. Upon physical death, the soul energy, carrying that SI invariant, is pulled to the sun.
The sun?
Yes, the sun. It's the solar system's primary gravitational attractor, which ensures the soul is sent off-planet to a specific waiting area.
And crucially, the source details how stars function as local points in the fabric of spacetime, points where soul identities can group themselves. This grouping isn't random. The sun acts as a staging ground, which enables that stored psi to become a localized point in the cosmic field. That makes re-entry possible when the resonant frequency calls it back. It's a unified, mathematically conscious theory designed for managing the soul's transition between world lines.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the gravitational mechanism is verifiable science. Let me tell you why. While gravity is an observable, predictable force, the framework uses highly speculative physics to bridge this immense gap between 4D physics and 5D metaphysics. The material invokes concepts like brain cosmology, noting that gravity is the only force weak enough in our 4D world because it's the only one strong enough to leak into the 5D bulk. It also references Kaluza-Klein theory, suggesting 5D gravity manifests to us as electromagnetism. It's leveraging cutting-edge, untestable theoretical models to validate a metaphysical assertion. The core premise requires us to accept an analogy that mass-based gravitational pull is equivalent to soul energy attraction. That is a beautiful theoretical construct, but it's an assumption of equivalence, not a proven scientific link.
That's a compelling argument, but I would argue that acknowledging limitations in our current measurement tools doesn't invalidate the theoretical structure itself. The framework uses the known properties of gravity, its profound influence on space-time geometry, its theoretical ability to leak into higher dimensions, to explain the soul's residence in a higher dimensional space. And this is precisely how the soul, operating from a 5D vantage point, can see through the, quote, fog of the fourth dimension of time and perceive the human yearning of the living. And, the goal here is intensely practical. To ensure no wisdom, no history, no family connection is ever lost. The current process of death creates wandering souls, ghosts, demons, who linger in the electromagnetic field, tethered there by the emotional gravity of the living.
So, replacing the command rest in peace, which is essentially a tether, with the command move in power to the sun is the programmatic solution to prevent this loss. The sun provides the energy for the next cycle.
The goal is noble, I agree. But we have to interrogate the process of calling the soul back, because this is where the system becomes highly susceptible to subjective human variables, and that undermines the claim of exact science. The science of the name relies on the frequency, amplitude, and timbre of a name being spoken into the watery tomb of the mother's womb. This is linked to the idea that sound creates crystalline structures in water, referencing work suggesting that positive emotions create perfect fractal crystals, while negative emotions create, disorganized, muddy shapes. So with the DNA re-encoding, the fractal pattern matching the soul's size is subject to the emotional state of the parent, or the pitch of their voice, or environmental noise. It ceases to be an exact, predictable science. It demands a kind of spiritual mastery of emotional states to work, which classifies it as a spiritual art form, not predictable engineering.
Of objective engineering that's specified in the practice. The system explicitly demands moving beyond subjective yearning. The name creates a resonant feedback loop, yes, but the practice demands objective tools and external synchronization to ensure precision. It's called harmonic wave resequencing. This is a programmatic change in the DNA backbone. And the system specifies that parents must use high vibrational frequencies, specifically gamma, alpha, and delta waves, in the mother's environment. These are objective, measurable brain states that must be maintained. And what's more, the process requires aligning conception and birth with the deceased's specific sidereal position, the position of the constellations relative to the sun at the time of the previous birth.
But this level of objective coordination makes the system inherently inaccessible. We're talking about timing conception 9 months out to hit a specific sidereal constellation, using specific sound technology, managing complex internal wave states, and limiting the effort to close cosmic kin. Those whose SIU invariant shares a similar harmonic resonance. If the practice is so extraordinarily complex and failure-prone for the average person, if the slightest emotional disturbance or timing error
can result in a fruitless attempt. It can't be deemed a viable universal science capable of starting a global revolution, as the source claims. A reliable science has to be replicated by the uninitiated. This functions more like an esoteric art reserved for masters.
The necessity of that precision is what elevates it to a law science. If the goal is programmatic control over life and death, then precision is absolutely paramount. The restriction to cosmic kin isn't arbitrary. It's a limitation imposed by physics. You have to have a close enough fractal pattern to establish that resonant feedback loop. The system is offering a pathway to mastery. It's demonstrating that the biological body is a body temple that can be repeatedly re-encoded using these forces. The challenge of the practice, it's just the hurdle required to overcome millennia of accidental, passive rebirth. The framework provides the blueprint for engineering the return of the highest wisdom, the return of the Christ spirit, by creating the perfect biological receptacle.
But let's circle back to the core tension. Even if masters can execute the practice, its foundational mechanism, the definition and behavior of the SI invariant, remains locked in the fifth dimension, unverified by our 4D instruments. So the entire edifice rests on an act of faith in a non-local constant. We have a set of exquisitely detailed instructions on how to perform a ritual, explained with scientific language, but we can't empirically prove the subject of that ritual even exists as it's defined.
Well, I would say the framework offers a unifying, perennial science that provides a pathway to mastery, demonstrating that the biological body, this body temple, can be repeatedly re-encoded using scientifically defensible forces and frequencies. The structure for achieving purposeful rebirth is mathematically and chemically defensible. It moves the cycle of life and death from chance to consciousness.
And I would say the system presents an elegant and compelling unified vision for existence and identity. However, its claims of scientific validity rely on leveraging speculative physics and using the language of science to create powerful, yet ultimately untested analogies for spiritual phenomena. The complexity of the practice makes it restricted, suggesting it's a master-level spiritual technology, not a universal law science.
This exchange, I think, really highlights the deep and enduring tension between knowledge that can be described mathematically, that's internally consistent, and knowledge that requires an intellectual leap into the fifth-dimensional realm of the soul, where our traditional measurement it breaks down.
And so the listener is left to consider whether theoretical precision, the perfect blueprint, is sufficient to confirm scientific truth, or if physical verification and universal accessibility remain the defining elements of a true law of science.
Thank you for joining us for the debate.